Hello everybody, my name is Nano Hunter FF, and today we'll be counting down my personal top 10 Zelda Dungeons. Before we get started, I'm going to set a few rules. First, this list only applies to dungeons that I've played, so there probably won't be a lot of spirit tracks on this list. Second, I won't judge the dungeons on the boss fights, because those deserve their own list. And finally, this is all just my opinion. If your favorite dungeon isn't on this list, or I talk bad about a dungeon you like, it's not a personal attack on you, okay? Without wasting any more time, let's get on with the list. Number 10, the Shadow Temple from Ocarina of Time. The Shadow Temple is just really cool. There are a lot of Zelda dungeons with a dark atmosphere, but this one really takes it to another level. The whole theme of this dungeon is using the lens of truth to see elements of the dungeon that are hidden to the naked eye. This dungeon has an awesome aesthetic. It's half burial grounds and half torture chamber. To add some more, the dungeon has some really great imagery and some kind of brutal puzzles. You avoid a statue of the Grim Reaper, a room that's being enclosed by wooden spikes, and you dodge a couple guillotines coming from the sky. There's also some stuff like wind that pushes you into an abyss, and a bed made of spikes and needles. A couple of the rooms are even made of dirt and human bones. There's also a little bit of blood in a couple parts of the dungeon. My favorite part is when you take a spooky ship through a sea of fog, and after the battle, the ship falls into the afterlife. Can't really remember the music, so that's a little disappointing. But overall, it's a really good dungeon from a really good game. Number 9, the Earth Temple from Wind Waker. Escort missions aren't something video games do well, but it's pulled off perfectly with the Earth Temple. Unlike other games where your partner is useless and you have to babysit them, or in Wind Waker's Wind Temple, where they're technically useful but still just stupid, Medley is actually a great help in the Earth Temple. That's because her harp thing actually reflects light, so you can solve mirror puzzles before even getting the mirror shield. And then when you get the mirror shield, you have 2 items to reflect light with, and, well, you can imagine the great puzzles this temple comes up with using this concept. Oh yeah, Medley can fly. Awesome. The Earth Temple has it all. A great dungeon item, great atmosphere, and on top of that, a partner that isn't death weight. The only flaw is that you have to constantly play the command melody to control Medley, and that quickly becomes a drag. But overall, it's a great dungeon. Number 8, City in the Sky from Twilight Princess. One of the greatest parts of Twilight Princess for me was City in the Sky, a multi-level epic almost completely devoid of solid ground. The item for City in the Sky is one you've already gotten, a second claw shot. Clearly a stroke of pure genius, because these 2 claw shots easily become one of the best items in the Zelda series. This dungeon is huge. It might take you hours your first time through. This dungeon has a great design and music, which is good because you're probably going to get lost. Great Bay Temple from Majora's Mask. Here we go. It's time for me to defend my boy Majora's Mask. I really don't see why everyone hates this dungeon. It's pretty easy. Here's something no one can deny. The music is great. It's like this cool factory music. This dungeon is a fairly big dark factory, tons of water. You have to heavily utilize the Zora form, and seeing as that's my favorite transformation in the game, I love it. And this dungeon puts it to great use. As you explore a dungeon, you find mechanisms that change the water currents to get to new areas. Skilled players can use the amazing Zora swimming through the tunnels without bumping into the walls. This place has another mechanic going for it. The ice arrows can freeze water, allowing you to get areas without the Zora. The ice arrows are also used for dungeons and great and creative mini-boss. This dungeon even makes use of the fire arrows in tandem with the ice arrows, which leads to some pretty good puzzles. This dungeon isn't too big and colored pipes guide you, so you shouldn't be getting lost like in the water temple. Overall, this is just a really well designed dungeon. Number 6. Ancient Cistern from Skyward Sword. I know, another water dungeon. But my list, not yours, and I love this dungeon. This dungeon does everything right. This is easily one of the most creative dungeons I've played in a long ass time. The main floor is a water dungeon, but the basement floor is the shadow dungeon. Both areas have great puzzles and memorable moments. Like when you have to climb away from the zombie goblins, but then you smash them to death with a giant statue. Everything about the dungeon is in its looks, so I actually don't have much to say about it, so look at the footage. Number 5. The Spirit Temple from Ocarina of Time. Here we are, the best dungeon in the Ocarina of Time. This dungeon is the last traditional one in Ocarina of Time, and it doesn't disappoint. This dungeon has a pretty cool theme. Just give it a listen. This dungeon is split into 2 sections. One half is done with Child Link, while the second, and longer half, is done with Adult Link. That alone would put it pretty high on the list, but this dungeon has some pretty cool puzzles. The Anubis things that can only be killed with fire are definitely a highlight. This was the first introduction of the mirror shield in a 3D Zelda game, and while the puzzle with these things aren't as cool as in Wind Waker or Majora's Mask, they're still pretty sweet. This dungeon has a lot of enemy types, but the best is undeniably the Iron Knuckle, and this dungeon has 3 of them. Of course, this dungeon also has a cool aesthetic. This dungeon is one of the greatest things to revisit in the Ocarina of Time. Number 4. The Arbiter's Grounds. It's time for my absolute favorite part of Twilight Princess. This dungeon is just so good. It's kind of like a mix of the Forest, Spirit, and Shadow Temple, as well as a desert dungeon. As someone who really enjoys the Mummy, this dungeon would naturally be pretty high on the list. I really like the scarab beetles and wish they were in more parts of the dungeon. In the first part, you have to track down 4 ghosts to recover the flames to continue. And it's a really nice homage to Ocarina of Time. And then we have the soul rats, which horrified me the first time I saw them. It's one of the few times I've ever been scared in a Zelda game, let alone a video game. Then of course we have the spinner. It's pretty much a Beyblade that you get to ride. Grinding on rails is too fun, and you get to avoid some dangerous obstacles while going at crazy speeds. You even get to traverse entire rooms on the spinner like some roller coaster. This is the first dungeon on the list where I really feel sad finishing it when I and that's like the best compliment I could give for a dungeon. Number 3. The Fire Sanctuary from Skyward Sword. The Ancient Cistern isn't even the best dungeon in Skyward Sword. There's still this. The Fire Sanctuary blows every single Skyward Sword dungeon out the water. This place has some of the best puzzles and enemies in any Zelda game. I really like the giant lava hands and some of the combat sections. This place is pretty long too, which is good for such an amazing dungeon. The part where you take a leap of faith and the platform materializes after you jump is great. I didn't hate the underground sections, but they definitely weren't a highlight. With great pacing and great design, this makes the Fire Sanctuary the most memorable part of Skyward Sword, aside from the finale. Number 2. Sword and Shield Maze from Oracle of Seasons. The Sword and Shield Maze isn't a very popular pick for the top 10 best Zelda dungeons, but this dungeon is one of the best ever made. As opposed to all the other dungeons on this list, Sword and Shield Maze is a 2D Zelda dungeon. This is the last traditional dungeon in Oracle of Seasons, and it's close to being the best in the whole series. It makes use of everything in your arsenal, including the magnetic gloves, which is the best Zelda item ever. Oracle of the Seasons excels in its combat, and this dungeon has some of the best combat in the whole game. This dungeon is massive with 2 large floors, but it's mostly linear so you won't be getting lost. Now onto the dungeon's main mechanic. This dungeon has 2 floors. The floors are like their own half dungeons. One is an ice dungeon, while the other is a fire dungeon. You take a piece of ice and lava from each floor to freeze over or melt entire sections of the dungeon to make the whole dungeon explorable and get to the boss. The music even has differences depending on what floor you're on. This is an amazing dungeon and I simply can't praise it enough. Number 1. Stone Tower Temple from Majora's Mask. This is the only dungeon that can top the last one. You knew this was gonna be on the list. I can't help it. This dungeon is one of the most incredible things ever made. The Stone Tower Temple fulfills on everything the human psyche thinks is excellent level design, and then some. This is the perfect dungeon. The first 3 dungeons in Majora's Mask utilize the transformations, and then the 4th and final dungeon uses all of them and adds a new one for the boss fight. And oh, that music. It has even more elements than that, like the mirror shield puzzles and the dungeon's amazing gimmick of flipping the whole thing upside down. This is the single greatest dungeon concept in the history of mankind. It's cool for Symphony of the Night to do it, but for a 3D Zelda game, it's just mind-blowing. This has everything great about Zelda Dungeons and then some. You've got 2 halves of a dungeon like 3 mini-bosses, weird as hell and interesting enemies, multiple floors, flying, swimming, great light puzzles, walking through lava, that whole upside down thing, and even more flying. If I ever had doubts of how good a game Majora's Mask was, I would just play this dungeon and those doubts would disappear. Well, that's the end of my list. See ya.